Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to day 2 of the 20th Budapest Hacktivity conference. There's still people arriving, but we do need to keep to time because our speakers have things to do also. So we'll get things moving straight away with Xeno Kovah.
All right, hello everyone. The quick about me is that 75% of my time, I've got nothing to sell you. I'm basically just working on a nonprofit, creating free training that I put available online, 100% free as in beer, and also free as in freedom open source training. So Open Security Training 2 is a nonprofit that I run. That's the majority of what I do with my time. 25% of my time is the kind of stuff that I'm showing today. It's doing research, but it's also just a Trojan horse so that I can tell you about open security training. So for the purposes of this presentation, what do I want to know? I want to know what kind of Bluetooth chip is inside any given device. So if we just pick some random smattering devices, I may know already what Bluetooth chips are inside of those, but I want to be able to know this for any given device. So this random hotel door lock, what does it use? Now, why would I want to know something like that? Well, the answer is because I want to know whether it's vulnerable to a firmware level, wireless, over-the-air exploit using no sort of authentication or anything like that. Now, there have been exploits like this in the past. The first one was presented by Armis in 2018 called Bleeding Bit. And then at Black Hat 2020, my wife, Veronica Kovah, presented a vulnerability in a superset of those Texas Instrument chips, affected more chips, and same sort of thing, wireless, over the air, no sort of authentication or anything, break-in, arbitrary code execution on the Bluetooth firmware. She also presented vulnerabilities like this in Silicon Labs chips. And additionally, researchers at CIMU Labs at TU Darmstadt in Germany have presented this sort of vulnerability in Broadcom chips. So basically, I was coming into this work knowing that my wife had vulnerabilities that would allow her to just arbitrarily get code execution on random Bluetooth chips, but we didn't actually know where these things all applied, and the reality is no one knows this today. So I wanted to figure it out, but I decided to go about it in a very nice and naive way. I just decided to start sniffing a bunch of Bluetooth devices and see what they could tell me about, if I could figure out what kind of chips they were running based on what I could find. So what kind of hardware did I use for this? I had a variety of Bluetooth-capable hardware laying around my house, but the winner in terms of price was the Raspberry Pi Zero W, because this is $15. Then I did some naive tests to say, okay, if I just sniff at the same time a Raspberry Pi Zero W and a Raspberry Pi 4, which one of those picks up more Bluetooth devices? Neither of them has an antenna connector. They both just have PCB antennas on the chip. On the board, on the PCB, and it turned out that the Raspberry Pi Zero actually collected almost twice as many as the Raspberry Pi 4. I don't know why its PCB antenna was superior, but it was. And so additionally, Raspberry Pi 4 versus their BeagleBone Black, which actually did have an antenna, they got about the same amount. So the winner here was, again, the Raspberry Pi Zero. And then I went and did a test to say, how long do these things actually run off of a USB battery pack? And the winner, once again, was the Raspberry Pi Zero. Why would I want to know how long it runs off of a USB battery pack? Like, do I really need 90 hours of sniffing? Am I going to be running around myself for 90 hours? Well, the answer is no, but I didn't think the audio was going to work there. So, what do you see there? You see a traffic jam, right? What do I see there? I see a bunch of slow-moving Bluetooth devices that are ripe for the sniffing. So that is a video from a particular overpass in the Washington, D.C. area where I like to deploy sniffers. And, over the 90 hours, or more like 4 days, 5 days with some of my newer, bigger battery packs, I will collect upwards of 15,000 Bluetooth devices, 15,000 named Bluetooth devices, many, many more unnamed devices. So my software setup, extremely naive. I'm not proud of it, but simple works. So there in tiny, tiny font is the where you can get the scripts that I use, because it turns out the majority of my data is just a bunch of bash scripts, right? So don't overcomplicate it. It's just Linux wrappers around tools like BTMon, Bluetooth control, etc. I did actually try to do things the quote-unquote right way according to the BlueZ people from Linux. And ultimately, I came up with something that was less capable, more difficult to use, and so I've pretty much thrown it away, and I just use the naive approach at this point. Now, there's only 2 pieces of basic background information about Bluetooth that you need to know for the purposes of this talk. The first is we're going to be talking about BD adders, Bluetooth device addresses, a lot. And there are two types of Bluetooth. There's Bluetooth Classic, which has existed since about 2000, and there's Bluetooth Low Energy, which has existed since about 2012, something like that. Bluetooth Classic is the BD adder looks essentially like the MAC addresses you know and love from Ethernet. So I just grabbed this, and this particular person chose to put the most significant bits over here. So the top 24 bits are the IEEE OUI, Organizational Unique ID, that you're maybe familiar with. So looks like that, and we can say based on that, okay, the top 24 bits say this is made by Responics Inc. Now for Bluetooth Low Energy, there's actually 4 different types of devices. There's first a single bit that says, is this a public address or is this a random address? And then of the random, there are 3 variants. Now, for the public addresses, like the Bluetooth Classic addresses, those are static, unchangeable, and therefore they're trackable. So if you ever see a Bluetooth device with a thing advertised BLE, but also public, then it's going to be exactly the same as Bluetooth Classic. Upper 24 bits tell you something about the company that makes it, and it's ultimately trackable because it never changes. Now there's this other type called static addresses, static random addresses. These are also trackable, and what differentiates these 3 classes of address is basically the 1 bit that says I'm a random address, and then there are 2 bits in the most significant bits of the BD adder, and if the uppermost 2 bits are 1, 1, then that means it's a static address. Theoretically, these things can change. In practice, I never see them change. The key thing is they're not supposed to change at runtime, so they can maybe change when the system reboots, but in practice, I've never seen these change on devices that I personally have that have random addresses, random static addresses. So they're also trackable. They're equivalently trackable, but the key differentiator here is public addresses, the upper 24 bits tell you something about the company. Static random addresses, no information available about the company. So that's going to matter for me trying to figure out which Bluetooth chips the devices are using. Then there are the resolvable addresses. Those are theoretically not trackable because these are the things that you hear that Bluetooth Low Energy added that's supposed to make it more secure, more resilient against tracking. These will cycle periodically. On your iPhone, the thing changes its BD adder every 15 minutes or so. That's a resolvable address. And it just means the upper 2 bits are 0 and 1. There's some information in there, but we don't care about that for purposes of this talk. And then there is the non-resolvable address. And that is just the same thing, upper 2 bits, 0, 0, and a bunch of random stuff, so no information whatsoever. All right, so those are our trackable and untrackable. Now, when you see information like this in this presentation, this is just from BTMon. I don't know, is that animation actually work? Oh, yeah, it is on yours. Okay. So BTMon is the Linux tool that will capture information going between Bluetooth devices and the operating system. And so, for instance, it says something is public like that, and if you see public, and if you see this little tracking eyeball, that means that that device is trackable. And this particular example was some custom LED lights, and it's interesting because the BD adder is actually used as part of the name, and so even if it wasn't already public, well, now you could track someone by a static name everywhere they go, this particular car. If you see stuff look like this, black, green on black, that's later on eventually. I got tired of looking through all the BTMon output, and I put stuff into a database and correlated it properly, put all the information in one big bucket. So if you see stuff like this, that's from this Tell Me Everything script pulling from my database. Okay, so Wiggle is a open source project that does collection of information about cell towers, Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth. Now, it was started about 20 years ago, and it was mostly like Wi-Fi, stumbling, war driving, collecting that kind of information, and only recently in 2019 did they add Bluetooth. So I didn't actually know that they had this until maybe 2022 or something like that. I always thought it was just, Wi-Fi stuff, but recently they added Bluetooth, and that's super useful. There's no iPhone application for this, so I run it on a junk Pixel. And the key thing, though, is that although they have some information, and you're going to see a lot of Wiggle pictures in this, I mostly just use it for visualization because they're missing a lot of information we would want. One thing I will say is that for those who are not aware, it's collecting Wi-Fi, it's collecting Bluetooth, but these days I see about an order of magnitude more Bluetooth devices than I see Wi-Fi devices. And this is in comparison to 2004 early Bluetooth research where they said, well, there seems to be about 4 times as many Bluetooth as Wi-Fi. Nowadays, it's easily an order of magnitude or more in terms of how much Bluetooth is out there. Like, you're all broadcasting Bluetooth right now. I don't think you're all broadcasting Wi-Fi. So the origin of this project was that back in 2020, before the pandemic hit, I'd already made the decision to move from Silicon Valley, where I was working for Apple at the time, back to Washington, D.C., where I already owned a home. I wasn't going to pay insane Silicon Valley house prices. So before I left, I decided, hey, I'm going to be driving across the country. It might be fun to find out something about what kind of Bluetooth devices we see on the way. My wife had already, had her stuff ready for Black Hat for her exploits and stuff. So I said, okay, we've got exploits, but we don't know what it applies to. Let's collect some information on the way. So that was basically my cannonball run. The pandemic hit, and now instead of a nice leisurely, let's go visit some national parks kind of thing, it was let's get there as fast as humanly possible, let's not get on a plane, and let's just get across the country. You can see I lost GPS at some point, and I didn't know about Wiggle at the time, so, I still collected the data, but I didn't get, the visualization for it. But let's take something a little bit more near and dear to some of your hearts. So this is all the Wiggle data for Bluetooth, for Budapest. And this is specifically the data for my trip from the airport here to the conference. And so I took the Minibud airport shuttle and was really happy about it because they actually dropped me off last. Now see, Bluetooth changing will change your life. I used to hate being stuck in traffic, now I love it. I used to hate being in conference crowds, now I love it because I'm always getting so much Bluetooth data and it's great. And so I was great, drive me all around downtown and I'll collect all sorts of information. Now, when I go to a new location, what I usually do is I just eyeball some of the data on the Wiggle report, and I'll see is there something that I've seen that I've never seen before. So in this case, this particular thing just popped out at me, HyperNet TV box. Now, apparently this is an Android TV type device. And when I looked at it in the Wiggle data, not just for my data, but then I started looking at the Wiggle data globally, turns out this thing only exists in Hungary and Serbia. Because it turns out this, Yettel company must be, only selling these devices in Hungary and Serbia. There's one of them in Germany, but that's probably a Hungarian who specifically moved to Germany. And the reason I can tell you that is because these particular BD adders, the most significant 24 bits, these are public addresses, and consequently I can say something about the company. These are two unique companies in China. And so basically this Yettel company must have contracted out the creation of the boxes. And then an interesting thing is that also, specifically, the Serbian ones have all caps HyperNet TV box, and the Hungarian ones have, camel case HyperNet TV box. So anyways, just something random that popped out while I was looking at the data. Another miscellaneous thing, I saw this thing called iHunt Watch 6T. I'd never seen something called an iHunt Watch before, so I decided to look into that. This is the key thing about Bluetooth is it can be very geographic specific, right? I just showed you something that only exists in 2 countries. This particular thing seems to be, mostly in Eastern Europe. iHunt, based on just Googling it quick, looks like it's a Romanian company. And so consequently, we see this, primarily Romania and some Bulgaria and some Hungary. And when I look a little bit closer at these names, sometimes the name, sometimes the name will actually have the last 2 bytes of the BD adder as part of the actual static name that is broadcasting all the time, and sometimes it won't. And the difference seems to be whether or not it is broadcasting via Bluetooth Classic or Bluetooth Low Energy. So that's just an example of some location anecdotes, local location anecdotes that I just collected in the last day. Now here's some more location anecdotes. So Las Vegas, this past DEF CON Black Hat, I was giving a training at Ring 0 at the Palms Hotel and just had my sniffer sitting up next to a window so I could get GPS. That's the GPS splat. The devices are actually in the conference hotel, but just the GPS says it's all over, same thing. It's obviously hard inside of buildings most of the time to get GPS signal. Although here, I have great GPS signal, so all of your data will be showing up on Wiggle later, specifically at this location. One of the interesting things I saw at the Palms Hotel is this thing called pay range. But this was kind of a weird and interesting case in that it would advertise the name of pay range, but then when you would scan the device actively and say, what's your name, it would come back with a different name called Blue Radios something. Now, the reason for that is because there's different types of packets in Bluetooth, and Bluetooth Low Energy specifically. There's advertisement packets, these adv-ind, advertisement indication, and sometimes some devices will say their name continuously and spray it out and shout it out, say, here's my name. Other devices, sometimes you have to say specifically, send a scan request and say, what's your name, and you get back a scan response. So these particular devices came back with different names in the scan response versus just the advertisement. So what are the devices? Well, they are these dongles that are apparently plugged into vending machines. So there's this company, PayRange, and they sort of act like a kind of PayPal type company where you put money into your account, and then they have an app that you run on your phone, and then they convince people to plug their dongles into their vending machines, like laundry mats and all sorts of different things, and that app talks over Bluetooth to your phone, and it says, hey, this person's got money in their account, you should go ahead and let them have a candy bar. So that, back in the day, when I was in high school, hacking vending machines was decidedly a more low-tech affair, and now you need to know something about Bluetooth. So also, I can tell based on the BD adder that this is a quote-unquote Blue Radios company. And based on that, I can tell you that it is a Nordic NRF SoC. So Nordic is a silicon maker. Blue Radios is a module maker. Module makers are essentially what I would call manufacturers in the middle. They take someone else's Bluetooth chip, they stick it on a little module, maybe integrate PCB antenna, and then consequently they sell that module to someone else. So the first little takeaway here is that chip identification is what I'm going for, right? I want to know who's using what sort of Bluetooth chips. Finding out a module vendor of a particular thing can give me a potential set of chips that it might be using, because a module maker may use only one chip or they may use a few different chips. And knowing what Bluetooth chip is one of the things I want to know. Another thing, wandering around Vegas, what I usually do, my MO, is I got my sniffer in my backpack. I've got a phone app open that is not able to log and collect all the information I want, but it shows me if anything interesting shows up that I haven't seen before. Wandering around Vegas, saw a bunch, I wander into the Wynn Hotel and casino, and specifically when I get into the casino area, I see dozens of IGT card reader things show up. And so if you're in a casino and you see a bunch of card reader things, that's interesting. Looking at the information, it says specifically manufacturer stream IGT. So what is IGT? Well, it's a gaming hardware machine maker. And so nowadays, slot machines are not mechanical affairs, but they're basically overglorified laptops, desktops with multiple screens. And indeed, on their website, you can find that you can buy a replacement Bluetooth module for their devices. Looking a little bit more at their documentation, essentially what these IGT card reader thing has to do with is that yes, you can have physical cards that someone would put in that holds like cash balance, or I don't know exactly how they work, whether they just have an ID or whatever. But normally these days, people are not putting feeding coins into the thing. They have like magstripe and RFID type things. This type of thing is saying instead you make like a loyalty program application for your phone, like the Caesars Palace or MGM loyalty application, and then the people just tap their phone to the reader, it has Bluetooth, and consequently they know who's actually playing. And this sort of all lines up with the fact that when I look at the actual, there's some transmit power data on this thing, and it has extremely, extremely low transmit power. So you're tapping not because it's like NFC, but because you have crazy low Bluetooth power to keep it proximate. All right, so where else are these things advertising? Well, all over the place. I'm just going to kind of skip through this quickly because I'm going to run out of time. Basically, there's like 4 things: Boulder Station, Texas Station, Sunset Station. They're all sort of, you would expect, the same company running all those hotels, all those casinos. And so yeah, they're basically all over the place. And keep in mind that the Wiggle data is only showing you things where they actually had GPS signal at the time. So if you're inside of a mega casino, you probably don't have GPS signal. There are probably a lot more of these in a lot more places. Key question is, are they supposed to be advertising or are they misconfigured? I don't actually see these everywhere. So I would go in and sometimes I would see them, sometimes I wouldn't, even within the same casino. And the answer is, I don't know. Bears further investigation. Another miscellaneous location data is my wife Veronica's Korean, so we went to Korea last year for vacation. I did run around Gangnam with a sniffer because I can. I was talking about geographically located things. We can have things that are country specific. We can have things that are state specific in the United States. Here in Seoul, South Korea, I saw these kick-going scooters and electric bikes that are actually city-specific. They exist nowhere else in Korea, nowhere else in the world, only in Seoul. Now, they are trackable, but what was way more interesting to me is the fact that they advertise a BD adder that say they're associated with Expressive. Expressive is one of the chip makers that actually makes Bluetooth chips. So the takeaway here is that sometimes the BD adders themselves will actually say, like, I am this particular company, Texas Instruments, Silicon Labs, Expressive. And so in that case, you can have a very, very good idea that the Bluetooth chip itself is that particular vendor's Bluetooth chip. And knowing which chip they use is one of the things I want to know. So another thing, I went and visited a professor at KAIST, which is one of the top schools in South Korea. There was some random device. I'm looking around at devices. This one caught my eye because it was 8 dB transmit power. That's kind of high. I was kind of saying, what is that thing? Looked at it. The BD said it's BNCom. What is BNCom? Look it up. This turns out to be actually a Korean-only Bluetooth module maker, and you can see they've got their product listing of all the various modules you can buy. When I go look at other data from BNCom that I have, because I was kind of getting nowhere figuring out what this one particular device is, I see another device that was called BCM LN300AS, and that was an off by one from the specific things that they were selling and showing on their webpage. So probably just a newer model. Additionally, those show that they have NRF chips. Those are Nordic silicon chips. And so then what I did is I went and looked at the FCC database. So the FCC is the Federal Communications Commission. It is a regulatory authority in the United States who's responsible for making sure that wireless devices, radio devices, electromagnetic spectrum generating devices don't transmit at too high of power, right? You maybe heard recently that Apple got in trouble for transmitting too high of power in France because their regulatory authority checked it and said it's too high. So FCC in the United States actually requires all makers of wireless transmitting things to submit information to them for compliance, and they actually put the information on their website. It includes things like internal photos of the devices, and so people who work in the wireless space know that they can go and look at these things, and if we squint our eyes very carefully there, we can see that that is an NRF 52805 chip. And so, the takeaway here is that, and this is well known already by wireless people, but looking at FCC database things, sometimes you can get actually the chip that has the Bluetooth chip from it, sometimes you can't. So it's kind of hit or miss, but it is a good resource nonetheless. So that's the end of my location anecdotes. Let's talk some device-specific anecdotes. When it comes to Teslas, those are super trackable, both because they have random static BD adders that never change. I have a Model 3 and it's never changed over the life of the product. They also have a randomish looking thing that starts with S and ends with C. And it turns out that the middle bits are actually part of the VIN number, the vehicle identification number. And there's a much better presentation where you can go deeper into, all things about Tesla and tracking them. So the other thing, though, that I would say while we're on the topic of Teslas is that people tend to forget that Bluetooth is an attack surface unto itself. At the most recent Pwn2Own, the Synactive folks actually made their first level of infection of the Bluetooth, of the infotainment system via Bluetooth. So the details of that are not public yet, but if I had to guess, knowing that this is a Linux box, they probably had an exploit for the BlueZ Linux stack, and they jumped in with that, and then they proxied their way and moved laterally around the system. But that in and of itself is not new. The Keen Lab researchers had done the same sort of thing against Lexus 2017 model back in 2020. So this is just to say, again, anytime I'm showing you Bluetooth devices, think to yourself, what would it mean if you could just send a magic Bluetooth packet and take over the chip? So then there are other things like Rivian, competitor to Tesla. Well, it's got, static names that are also public BD adders, and those use Texas Instruments chips. So the BTMon didn't know that that was the OUI for Texas Instruments, but my tool did. And so then if we look at the FCC database, this is like, mwah, chef kiss. This is the perfect thing. I can see that's a CC2642 Texas Instruments chip, right? So now I know what Rivian is using. And there's a whole bunch of other car things, but we don't have time for this. This is just to say, here's a bunch of regexes of various things you can go find for cars, and I'll tell you that they're all using trackable static Bluetooth low energy or classic addresses. All right, surveillance cameras, Nest cameras. Here we have our first example of something where actually it is a random resolvable thing, so not trackable, right? Well, no, because they use static names. And so they have a naming convention that is basically A to Z and 0 to 9, 4 characters, and it seems to be increasing. So you might say, okay, well, if it's increasing, then, if I find N001, I found the first ever Nest camera sold. And so where is that? We can look with Wiggle, and we can see it's actually in Eden Prairie, Minnesota. Oh no, actually it's in Japan, but really it's actually in England. Now, the problem here is that, like I said, Wiggle doesn't actually collect as much information as I would like, and so specifically, had they collected this 16-bit UUID right here that is advertised by Nest devices, that UUID is a well-known assigned number within the Bluetooth space that specifically correlates to Nest. So if they had collected that, then we could look for N0001, specifically Nest devices. So the takeaway here is that 16-bit UUIDs are good for correlating companies and with products, so devices with the companies that made them. So I filed some tickets for Wiggle to add this information, and they have started to do that. If you get the latest version of the app on device, it will show you that. I don't think they've actually correlated it up on the servers yet, but haven't checked. All right, flippers. So I first saw, well, I'll get to that in a second. So why are flippers beaconing is my question. I don't know because I don't have a flipper. Why don't I have a flipper? Because they have extremely low transmit power, 0 dBm. So using the official Bluetooth range estimator, that's a 15 to 21 meter range. Legally in the United States, you're allowed to go up to 20 dBm. dBm is a logarithmic scale, so that's an extremely much higher powerful thing. So flippers, just as an FYI, not super useful for Bluetooth, attack, unless you want to get really close to your victims, right? So I first saw flippers at hardware.io last year, and I just started putting these things into Wiggle and saying like, okay, has Wiggle seen these flipper devices anywhere else? And the second one, turned out like I saw this flipper device at hardware.io in the Netherlands last year, and then Wiggle had seen it near a Panera Bread outside of Atlanta, Georgia. So we might reasonably infer that this hacker at the hacker conference lives over in Atlanta, Georgia. There are things saying like, hey, how can we change the name of our flipper devices? And the answer is you can't, because it's programmed into the one-time programmable memory unless you like customize your firmware specifically to, add a new random name. Now, even if you added a new random name, instead, the thing is you're still going to be trackable because it is a public BD adder, and that's not changing, so you need to change that as well. There are tickets out there to fix this. That was opened last year, and as of April, nothing's been done on it. So until then, Flipper specifically, like Flipper Actipil and Flipper Collimom, if you're in the audience, because I've seen you wandering around. Yeah, I see you. And I know like someone here is doing that new dumb like Bluetooth like spoofing thing where you send packets that Apple devices will say like, oh, I'd like to pair with the thing, and I'm assuming it's one of the flippers because it's not everywhere. If you had a nice, good, powerful transmitter, it would be everywhere. Anyways. All right, as I was doing my little cannonball run across America, I stopped at a hotel in West Virginia, and I saw a whole bunch of Bluetooth devices. They didn't look like Bluetooth devices like a bunch of Samsung TVs, didn't look like a bunch of Chromecasts. They had this randomish looking name. There was no obvious correlation with this name between that and the BD adder. So I started looking for like Bluetooth hotel room lock or something like that. I don't remember exactly what I searched for, but somehow I came up with the fact like, hey, yeah, this thing looks very much like the literal physical lock that's on the door right now. And this thing has Bluetooth technology. So probably a Bluetooth hotel door lock. Now, if I look at the OUI, this is correlated to GE Security, so the company is GE Security. There's also UUID 16 that is correlated to UTC Fire and Security, so maybe a company that got bought by GE, maybe not. Start looking for those all over America based on the OUI, and there's a few of them, and just randomly decide to zoom in on Charlotte, North Carolina, and what I land on is a Hilton Charlotte airport that has a whole bunch of these devices, and they look very similar sort of naming convention to what I was seeing at this West Virginia hotel. And indeed, if we zoom out a little bit, we see DoubleTree by Hilton, Hilton Charlotte Airport, and Embassy Suites by Hilton, all in the same physical area, all running these same sort of GE Security OUIs. So one might reasonably infer that all of these devices, with a whole bunch of the devices, are using these Bluetooth hotel room locks. Now at this point, I'll say that back at Black Hat 2019, there was research that was saying, like, hey, we can defeat security on Bluetooth locks, not just the normal like physical padlock type things, but also Bluetooth locks at one of Europe's highest hotel suites, Hotel H. I don't know which one it is, but that's just what they said they found. So this is to say that there's already been work that has successfully defeated the security of hotel locks. Now, As I said in my abstract, does this open the door to assassinations? And perhaps you thought I was being hyperbolic. Perhaps you thought hotel security is only about evil maid attacks. No, I want to remind you of this little thing that happened back in 2010, where a leader of Hamas was assassinated in Dubai. Wait, was it Dubai or Qatar? I forget. But they were assassinated by presumably Mossad, and there's this very good article in Wired and also a YouTube video where they basically look at the security footage from the airport and from the hotel, and that was basically saying they have reason to believe that these particular people wandered into the hotel and killed the person. So, specifically, they say they don't know for sure whether the people knocked on the door and said, "Hi, hotel staff," and then barged their way in, or whether they actually used a technological bypass and defeated the security on the card reader and broke their way into the room that way. Because what they have is actual logs from the time, between watching the people go down the hallway and watching the people come back. They don't have camera footage from the hallway itself. They just have this one from the elevators, right? So around the corner and down the hall is where the assassination took place. And so between those times, they actually saw that there was a technological attack attempt on the lock system, and so they don't know whether it was actually successful or not. It could have, popped an error, but still actually succeeded. And so this is just to say that, who cares about Bluetooth hotel lock security? Well, assassins care. The kind of people who might actually, physically want to make their way into someone's hotel room. So from something a little darker to something a little lighter. Pokemon Go. Did you know that you don't have to get your phone out to play Pokemon Go? You can just buy one of these things and the thing will vibrate on your wrist whenever there's Pokemon in the area, and you just press the button and you'll capture those Pokemon. I don't know why they're broadcasting Bluetooth, but there it is. Bluetooth devices, Pokemon Go. Fun, right? All right, fitness trackers. Well, I don't really have a lot of time to talk about all this, so I'll just say basically every fitness tracker except Apple Watch does it wrong, and they're all using like static BD adders, and consequently, they're all trackable. But the more interesting thing to me is the fact that Fitbit, for instance, is actually advertising not 16-bit UUIDs, but 128-bit UUIDs. So they're always advertising these sort of things, and so in the actual advertisement packets, they do not actually have the name of the device saying like I'm a Fitbit Versa or an Ionic or a One or Flex, but they do have this 128-bit UUID. So as a purely passive device scanner, I could actually know that like this is a Fitbit device that's advertising right now. So again, like sometimes the name of a device will be an adv.inf, but in Fitbit's case it's not, but there is a UUID 128. But if you do a scan request and a scan response and you get that back fast enough, then you will know that this is specifically a Fitbit Flex or whatever. So what I actually did was as I see interesting names over time, I go, what is that? I Google it. And so I had seen like Flex and Inspire, etc., but then I just grepped my logs and said, okay, part of the UUID, what is that? And then I come back with a whole bunch of other Fitbit devices that I hadn't realized previously were Fitbit. So the takeaway here is that 128-bit UUIDs, when they're broadcast by devices, can actually tell you sort of what vendor or what model these potentially are. I might know something is Fitbit that I've never seen before because it's close enough to an existing Fitbit UUID, or I might know it's specifically a Fitbit Ionic. All right, in cars, there are a whole bunch of different things for ODB2 to Bluetooth connectivity. So ODB2 is that diagnostic port that's in cars. And the first one I ever saw was this thing called Fixed. And interestingly, like I just downloaded the Fixed app. I was in California. One of my neighbors must have had it because it was always seeing it from where I was renting. And I downloaded the app. I connected to the Fixed. There didn't seem to be any sort of authentication. Now their car was off, so I couldn't see like live statistics or anything, but basically no security whatsoever on it. And there are a whole bunch of other ODB2 things under a variety of names. There's some clear like white label type things. And the thing that I'll say about ODB2 things is there was a much more comprehensive study of 77 things, everything they could buy off of Amazon at the time, a mixture of Wi-Fi and Bluetooth ODB2 connectors. And what these researchers found is that basically everything had at least 2 vulnerabilities, and so they're all vulnerable. Now, why does ODB2 matter? Well, because ODB2 has access to the CAN bus. And so what can you do? So if you can break into these devices, this fixed device, right? If you can break into it, then you can send messages on the CAN bus. Why does that matter? Well, that's the talk that's coming up next, right? CAN bus injection. So now I want to stay with me for a second here because I'm gonna kind of change a little bit what we're talking about in terms of threat models. So I was just talking about, devices where you can inject CAN onto things. You could also track the cars based on these fixed devices. Now, it's becoming increasingly common for people to deploy automated license plate readers. And this is not just like law enforcement, but there's like companies that are typical surveillance type companies where even down to the level of like HOAs, like a community, they will try to like sell an HOA, an automated license plate scanner, to include it in their global data of like automated license plate scanning, which then they go off and like sell to police agencies, for instance. Now, most of the time when you hear about like Bluetooth privacy threats, you hear about tracking. Early on when there were like beacons, like Bluetooth beacons, when Bluetooth Low Energy was coming out, people were mostly concerned. People were mostly talking about the use case of advertisers like tracking you in a mall and being able to send you targeted ads. What I haven't seen is a lot of conversation around the idea of the police set a Bluetooth scanner in a given area, and then it just collects everything, and then later on when there's a criminal investigation, they want to actually correlate, like, here's the criminal, here's their Bluetooth device that, they had a Fitbit, they wear a Fitbit everywhere they go, and hey, cool, I can put them in that location at that time because of my Bluetooth scanner capability. So the thing I want to say is that there can be surveillance via Bluetooth where the authority is collecting this information. But there's also the concept of surveillance, which is where the public captures information to hold authorities accountable. And so I would say Wiggle is kind of more on the surveillance thing. Now, with that in mind, I want to talk about Bluetooth body-worn cameras for a second. These are things that police potentially wear in order to, make some more accountability, both in terms of the police actions and so that it's not actually, their word against someone else's. So this particular regex is for this particular Panasonic body cam. I know this is the serial number because eBay shows it. And I first realized this was like a police device when I drove past the police who had stopped someone somewhere. I had my GPS data and I said, okay, that's what that is. So the key thing about these is they're using public BD adders and therefore they can be tracked. And an interesting open question, I don't know the answer to it right now, is do these things only broadcast via Bluetooth when they're actually switched on? Because one of the problems with body cams is that sometimes they have a habit of being switched off exactly when you would actually want the evidence of what's going on in this police interaction. So open question. I'll just say that there actually was at this past DEF CON someone who did a more thorough deep dive into this topic area in the context specifically of Axon, which is the company that bought tasers. So they also sell, they have tasers, but they also sell body cams to police departments. All right, running out of time, so I'm going to go through this next bit a little quick. So continuous glucose monitoring, this is a body-worn device. And basically it sends back Bluetooth information to either a dedicated device or nowadays to your phone. And when I say it's a body-worn device, what I mean is that it's stabbed into the skin so it can literally suck your blood and prepare that information and make it available to you. Now, they advertise as Dexcom, so their names are Dexcom, so you know when there's a diabetic in the area with a Dexcom device stabbed into themselves. They have random static addresses, so they can be tracked everywhere, even if they didn't have, unique names. And they've got some information, I don't know what exactly it means. But this is the actual critical thing. Maybe you remember back around 2011 or something, someone hacked their own insulin pump. They had a custom wireless protocol at the time. Well, nowadays they don't have custom wireless protocols, they have Bluetooth. The insulin pump works with the Dexcom device. The Dexcom device says your insulin is this, and the insulin pump says, oh, you need a little bit more insulin injected into you. If too much insulin is injected into a person, it puts them into a coma or potentially kills them. So again, thinking about what does it mean if you can hack these things over the air? Well, it means you can potentially kill someone. So this is just to say that they're trackable. They say specifically they're tandem diabetes care. They've got GATT, which is another protocol, and a whole bunch of extra attack surface that's available to them. So yeah, that's kind of concerning that these are turning into that. Now this one I would have literally cut for time, except I have it in the abstract, so I had to include it for you. This is a CPAP, a continuous positive airway pressure thing. It's for people with sleep apnea, which is where you basically stop breathing at night because your airways get clogged. Now, what I'll just say about this is when I first found out about these devices, I was driving around in a quote-unquote bad neighborhood. And so the question that rose for me is I know that there's a correlation between obesity and sleep apnea. So I also know that there's a correlation between poverty and obesity. And so the question is, if poverty potentially causes obesity, if obesity causes sleep apnea, am I going to see more of these sleep apnea devices in poor neighborhoods, or is it going to be that poor people can't afford them, and therefore they're not going to be there? The data from all these devices in the Washington, D.C. area looks like this. The income distribution from the D.C. area based on zip code looks like this. Red is poor, blue is rich, and basically it's known that Southeast Washington, D.C. is a more poor area. So is that correlated positively or negative with the CPAPs? Well, the answer is it's less. It's negative correlation. So basically, turns out it's more the rich people have these devices, not the poor people. All right, and the final topic area, because I'm gonna have to super blast through this. Turns out that some heavy construction equipment has Bluetooth keyless ignition, essentially. And it's connected to the CAN bus. And essentially, they have trackable BD adders, Texas Instrument OUIs, so I know specifically as Texas Instruments. And so the question is, what would someone like my wife do if she wanted to attack and exploit this Texas Instrument thing with her Texas Instrument exploits? Well, she would look at the FCC database. She'd figure out what particular chip it has based on that. She'd pull up the data sheet. She'd go buy a development board and do her practice attacks on that. And then she'd search eBay to see if she can buy any of these things. Well, I was helping her with the eBay searching thing, and I couldn't find anything for used devices, but what I did find was these keys for $9, and these keys have this list of things that they actually work on. So basically everything in the world, so for $9. And if you compare the eBay photos to the FCC photos, to the user manual photos, the keys all seem to be cut the same. And so I had these grandiose visions of we're going to do this awesome stunt hacking where we're going to like steal like heavy construction equipment, take off and act like we're going to tear down a building. But no, that's dumb. Don't do that. Buy keys for $9 and then you can steal heavy construction equipment. So I had to put my security architect hat back on, and the result is it's actually a net win for security because everything in the world except these Bluetooth devices can be stolen for $9. So the Bluetooth is actually a win. Even if it's hackable, it's still a win because it's going to take days or weeks or months to figure out how to hack it. All right, that's it. There's my final takeaways is that maybe you're familiar with Wi-Fi stumbling, Wi-Fi sniffing. Bluetooth is a whole different ballgame. The tools are massively undeveloped. And the key thing is right now, even those of us with Bluetooth over-the-air wireless exploits, we have no idea what it applies to, and neither does anyone else. All right, my call to action is join me and we can rule the Bluetooth galaxy. And specifically, there's some ways. Unfortunately, you're going to have to go read the slides to get those. And this is just to say that it turns out I can get some information I want from things like BD adders, but other things I can see in the spec that there's useful information, I have to go collect that myself. And that's an example at DEF CON. You can see my box down here, actively fingerprinting, tooth printing, all of you as well. So stay tuned. This research will continue with the results of my active tooth printing at Hardware.io in about a month. All right, so that's it. Like I said, this is only 25% of my time, and as fun and as cool as this is, what's way cooler is open security training, where you can go get some free training from me on assembly, operating systems, internals, firmware, vulnerabilities, exploitation, and a bunch of other stuff. So thank you for your time. I'll take questions off to the side at the end. Thank you. Okay.